The galaxy was wide, full of light and wonder, but even in its greatness, there were laws older than stars. Among those laws was a rule that bound the alien dragons, a mighty species with scales that shone like crystal. These dragons were guardians of flame and sky, yet they were not free. The Galactic Council, the union of many species, had set strict laws to control their numbers and power. The dragons could bring new life only during certain seasons. If one of them gave birth outside of that season, it was seen as a crime. Sura was one of these dragons. Her scales glowed a deep silver, and her wings stretched wider than any ship that patrolled the stars. She was strong, noble, and proud, but she carried a secret inside her heart. She had given birth when no law allowed it. She had done so not from rebellion or pride but from love and fear. Her kind was fading. Year by year, the dragons grew fewer. The council called it balance, but Sura saw it as death. She chose to break the rule to save her species, even if it cost her everything. When the hatchling came into the world, it was small, weak, and fragile. Its scales had no shine, only a soft pale glow. Sura wrapped her wings around it, whispering warmth into its tiny body. She named it Aaron. To her, it was hope. To the galaxy, it was proof of her crime. The punishment was swift. She was captured by unseen energy nets that wrapped around her wings and tail. She could not fly, could not breathe fire, could not resist. Her child cried as strange machines pulled them both across the stars. The council's judgment was spoken with cold voices. They said she had broken the order, that her act was dangerous, that no one could be allowed to stand above the law. For her crime, she was cast into exile. Not killed, for the council wished to show mercy, but left on a barren moon where nothing grew, where the air was thin and sharp, and where survival was almost impossible. Chains of energy bound her body, making her wings heavy and her fire dim. Sura stood on the surface of the moon and looked at the empty horizon. There were no trees, no rivers, no stars close enough to warm her. Only rocks, dust, and silence. Yet she still curled her wings around Aaron, shielding the hatchling from the cold wind. Her heart ached, but her spirit refused to break. Night fell on the moon, and the stars above seemed endless. The little hatchling whimpered and pressed itself closer to her chest. Sura lowered her head and hummed a low sound, a lullaby of her kind. It was not enough to feed Aaron, but it gave comfort. The council's punishment was not only exile. A strange force pressed against her body. Every time she tried to gather strength, the force grew heavier, draining her energy. It was their way of keeping her weak, to remind her that she was bound. She knew she could not fight against it, yet she would not give in. The days passed slowly. Sura's body grew thinner as she gave what little she had to Aaron. She searched for food among the rocks, but the moon was empty. Sometimes she lifted her head and cried into the sky, a roar that carried her sorrow across the stars. No one answered. The galaxy had turned its face away from her. Yet still she endured. She remembered her ancestors who had once flown freely through burning skies. She remembered the great songs of her kind that spoke of freedom and life. She whispered those songs to Aaron, hoping the child would remember them even if she did not survive. In the silence of exile, a question burned inside her heart. Why must life be chained? Why must love be judged as a crime? She had given birth to save her people, not to defy the galaxy. Yet the council saw only fear. They feared dragons because dragons had once been strong. They feared the power of wings and fire, even though those powers had protected many worlds in the past. Sura lowered her head beside Aaron and closed her eyes. She knew she could not win against the galaxy alone. But she also knew she had done the right thing. She would suffer. She would weaken. She might even fall. Yet she had given her child a chance, and to her, that chance was worth more than her own freedom. On that lonely moon, mother and child lay under the endless stars. The galaxy had punished her, yet within her wings she carried hope. Somewhere beyond the silence, fate was turning. Somewhere, someone would hear her cry. The moon was silent, but the silence was broken by the soft, trembling cry of Aaron. The little hatchling pressed itself close to Sarah's chest, seeking warmth and food. Its scales shimmered faintly in the pale light, though they were still too soft to protect against the cold winds that swept across the rocks. Each sound from the young dragon was a plea for comfort, a plea for survival. Sarah lowered her head, touching her nose gently against the hatchling's small body. Her heart burned with love and sorrow. She had chosen exile so that Aaron could exist, but now she feared that the barren moon would steal her child before life could take root. She stretched her wings over the hatchling, forming a shelter against the chill, and whispered the ancient hum of her kind. Aaron's cry grew softer, but it never faded. It was hunger, it was fear, it was the sound of a fragile life clinging to the hope of a tomorrow. Sarah listened to it through the night, and each time she heard it, she promised herself she would endure. Her own hunger did not matter. Her weakness did not matter. Only Aaron mattered. The stars moved across the dark sky, sharp and clear, and Sarah raised her eyes to them. She remembered when she had flown among such skies, her wings cutting through the winds of distant worlds. She remembered the strength of her kind, the great flights of dragons across entire galaxies. Now she sat in chains, wings heavy, heart heavier. Yet in the cry of her child, she heard the echo of those old days. The sound was small, but it was strong. The moon gave her nothing. There were no rivers, no trees, no living soil. Only stones and dust. Sarah surged, walking slowly across the surface, dragging her bound wings behind her. Her claws scratched the rock as she searched for anything that could ease her child's hunger. She found only frozen water, hidden in the cracks of the ground. With care, she melted it in her mouth and let the drops fall for Aaron to drink. It was not enough, but it was something. Aaron cried again, louder this time, the sound echoing into the empty air. Sarah's chest tightened, and her eyes grew wet with sorrow. The cry carried across the surface of the moon like a song of despair, but it also carried something more. It carried a call, a sound that could reach beyond the barren world. Far away, beyond the silence, a human ship moved along its patrol path. Inside that ship was a soldier named Tamash. He had seen battles and lost friends, and he carried the weight of war in his eyes. His mission on this day was simple: patrol the outer edges, scan for dangers, and report back. He expected nothing more than empty space and long hours. But his scanner caught something strange. A faint sound, unlike any machine or signal. It was a cry. It did not belong to a star, nor to any natural force. Tamash leaned closer, frowning at the screen. The sound repeated, soft but steady, like the call of a living creature. His curiosity stirred. Few dared to land on dead moons, for they held nothing of value. Yet here was proof that life existed where none should be. The cry of Aaron reached him again. Tamash sat in silence, listening. It was not the cry of an enemy, nor of a weapon. It was the cry of something small and fragile. Without hesitation, he set his course toward the barren moon. He told himself it was duty, the need to investigate. Yet deep inside, he knew it was more. The sound had touched something in him, something beyond orders and discipline. Back on the moon, Sura felt her strength fading. The chains of energy grew tighter with each passing day, draining her body. Yet she never stopped shielding Aaron. When the child cried, she hummed. When the child grew restless, she nuzzled it close. She gave everything she could, even when she had nothing left to give. As Aaron's cry rose again, Sura raised her head and let out a roar. It was not the mighty roar of battle that once shook the skies. It was weaker, broken, but it carried her pain and her defiance. The sound joined the cry of her child, together forming a voice of hope against the silence of the galaxy. Above, Tamash's ship broke through the thin sky. He looked down at the surface and saw a great shadow curled against the rocks, wings wrapped around something small. His breath caught. He knew the stories of dragons, the warnings, the fear. Yet what he saw was not a monster. It was a mother. Aaron cried again, and this time Tamash heard it not through his scanner but with his own ears. The sound pierced his heart. It was the sound that drew him closer, the sound that would change the path of both dragon and soldier. The ship touched down on the barren moon with a soft tremor that sent a cloud of dust into the air. Tamash powered down the engines and sat in silence for a moment. He listened to the faint cry that had drawn him here, a sound so unlike the noise of machines and weapons. It was alive. It was vulnerable. It was calling for help. He tightened his helmet, checked his weapon, and opened the hatch. The cold air of the moon swept over him, sharp and biting. His boots sank slightly into the dust as he stepped out, and his visor displayed the empty stretch of rocks and cliffs. The surface looked lifeless, just as the records said it would be. Yet he knew the sound he had heard was real. Somewhere close, something waited. Tamash moved carefully, scanning the horizon. His training told him to be cautious. Stories of dragons filled the records of soldiers like him. The council spoke of them as dangerous beasts, proud and untamed. Yet the sound he had followed was not the roar of a beast but the cry of a child. That thought guided his steps as he walked over the rocky ground. He did not have to search long. His scanner lit up with a faint signal, and when he looked up, he froze. In the distance, he saw a shape lying against the cliffside. It was enormous, silver scales glinting in the starlight, wings folded close like broken sails. Around it flickered faint bands of light, energy chains that pinned the creature in place. A dragon. Tamash's breath caught in his throat. The sight filled him with awe and fear at once. His weapon hung at his side, but his hands did not lift it. The dragon lay still, but her eyes opened slowly, glowing with weary light. She looked at him, not with the fire of anger but with the deep sorrow of a mother who had endured too much. Between her wings, something moved. Tamash leaned closer and saw the hatchling. It was small compared to her, no larger than a hunting dog, but its form was unmistakable. Its pale scales gleamed faintly, and its cry carried into the thin air. It pressed itself against its mother's chest, seeking warmth. For a long moment, soldier and dragon stared at one another. The silence was heavy, broken only by the weak cry of the hatchling. Tamash could feel his heartbeat rise. The council had said dragons were dangerous. They had said they were selfish, proud, and cruel. But here before him was not cruelty. It was life struggling to survive. Sura raised her head slightly, though the chains pulled at her body. She let out a low hiss, a warning born of instinct. She did not trust him. She had seen too many enemies, too much judgment from the galaxy. Yet she did not strike. She did not breathe fire. She only shielded her child with her wings, as if daring him to come closer. Tomasz lowered his weapon slowly. He placed it against the ground and raised both hands to show he meant no harm. His voice echoed in his helmet, calm and steady. "I am not here to fight." Of course, Sarah did not understand his words. But she understood his actions. Her gaze softened, though her body remained tense. Tomasz unhooked a pack from his side and pulled out a small container of rations. The food was simple, dry, meant for soldiers on long missions. He set the container on the ground and stepped back. The hatchling tilted its head curiously, sniffing the air. Slowly, carefully, it stretched its small neck toward the food. Sarah shifted slightly, her eyes narrowing. She watched the hatchling with fierce protectiveness, but she did not stop it. Aaron nibbled at the strange food and gave a soft squeak. The sound was almost like a laugh. Tomasz felt a small smile touch his lips. He had seen so much war, so many battles that left only silence behind. To see life cling so tightly to survival stirred something deep within him. He crouched low, keeping his movements slow, and spoke again in a quiet voice. "You are not monsters. You are not enemies." Sarah lowered her head toward him, her eyes fixed on his. In that moment, something passed between them. No words, no shared language, only understanding. He had come not as a hunter, not as a soldier, but as someone willing to see the truth. Tomasz looked at the chains that bound her. The glow of the energy bands pulsed faintly, feeding on her strength. His chest tightened at the sight. He knew the council had placed them there. This was not justice. This was control. Aaron gave another cry, softer this time, and curled against Sarah's chest. Tomasz stood slowly, his mind clear. He could not walk away. He had found more than a strange signal on a barren moon. He had found a mother and her child, punished for the crime of survival. He knew the council would never forgive him if he chose to stand beside them. But as he looked at Sarah's tired eyes and the small life sheltered beneath her wings, Tomasz also knew his path was already chosen. The night stretched long on the barren moon. Stars glimmered above like cold lanterns, and the thin winds brushed against the rocks with a lonely sound. Tomasz remained near the dragon, though he kept a respectful distance. He had placed his weapon on the ground behind him, showing clearly that he would not raise it. In return, Sarah lowered her head, but her eyes never left him. Aaron, the small hatchling, pressed against her chest, yawning softly before curling back into her wings. Its earlier cries faded into soft breaths. Tomasz watched in silence, struck by the simple beauty of the scene. He had seen mothers shelter their children in war-torn villages on human worlds, and now he saw the same strength in a creature the council called a danger. Sarah shifted slightly. The chains around her wings glowed, tightening as if sensing her movement. She hissed, not at Tomasz but at the cruel weight that held her down. Tomasz's eyes narrowed as he studied the glow. It was no natural binding. The council had designed these chains to drain strength, to weaken without killing. They wanted her alive, but powerless. Tomasz took a step closer, careful and slow. Sarah's eyes sharpened. Her wings tightened around Aaron, warning him not to come too close. He stopped, lowering himself to the ground to appear smaller. With steady hands, he opened his pack again and pulled out more rations. He set them down and slid the container forward. Aaron stirred at the faint smell. The hatchling peeked out, blinking wide eyes at the strange human. Sarah gave a low growl, a warning to stay close. Yet curiosity pulled Aaron forward. The little creature stumbled on weak legs, sniffing the food. With a soft squeak, it nibbled again, just as before. Tomash smiled faintly. "You like it," he said, though he knew they could not understand his words. His tone was calm, gentle, the same tone he had once used when guiding frightened civilians during evacuations. Aaron lifted its head and gave a tiny chirp, a sound so light that Tomash felt his heart stir again. Sarah's gaze softened slightly. She saw no threat in the man's actions. He gave food, but he did not force closeness. He did not raise weapons or try to command. He simply offered and waited. Slowly, she began to sense that his presence was different from the voices of the council, different from the machines that had bound her. Hours passed, and Tomash remained where he was. The cold air bit through his suit, yet he did not move away. He felt that leaving would break the fragile trust forming between them. Instead, he sat beneath the starlight, speaking softly though he knew they could not understand. He told them stories of his home, of the fields on his world, of the sky where he once played as a child before war took him away. His voice was steady, almost like a lullaby. Aaron curled back against Sarah and fell asleep, its soft breaths rising and falling. Sarah's eyes closed for a moment, then opened again to study Tomash. She did not understand his words, but she understood his tone. It carried no threat, no command, only peace. When Tomash looked at the chains again, he felt anger rise inside him. The council had punished her for giving life. He could not see justice in that. He knew laws could hold order, but they were not meant to crush the bond of a mother and child. He clenched his fists, then forced himself to breathe. This was not the time for anger. This was the time to show her that she was not alone. He reached into his pack once more and pulled out a water container. Opening it, he poured a small amount into a shallow dish and slid it across the ground. Sarah's eyes followed the movement. For a long moment, she did not react. Then she lowered her head slightly and nudged Aaron forward. The hatchling lapped at the water eagerly, its tail twitching. Tomash felt relief wash over him. This was the bridge. Small, fragile, but real. He looked up at Sarah again. "I will not hurt you," he said softly. "I promise." Her eyes, glowing silver beneath the chains, locked onto his. She could not know his language, but she could feel his intent. For the first time since her exile, she did not hiss or growl at the presence of another. Instead, she lowered her great head beside her child and released a long, tired breath. Tomash leaned back against a rock, watching the pair. The silence of the moon no longer felt so heavy. He understood now that this meeting was no accident. The galaxy had left them in chains, but he had found them. And in finding them, he had discovered something more powerful than orders or laws. Trust. It was only the beginning, but it was enough to change the path of what was to come. The morning light crept across the barren moon, casting pale shadows over the jagged rocks. Sarah stretched her wings slightly, testing the chains that bound her. They pulsed faintly with energy, heavier than they had seemed the day before. Each movement drained her strength, yet she refused to surrender. Aaron, her small hatchling, slept peacefully against her chest, unaware of the harsh law that had cast them both into exile. Tomash sat nearby, watching her closely. He had slept lightly, alert to any sign of danger. Even in the quiet, he felt the weight of the council's judgment pressing down on them. He knew their arrival here had not gone unnoticed. The galaxy had laws, and those laws were enforced. Dragons were not supposed to give birth out of season. Sarah had broken the rule, and now she paid the price. Tomasz understood the fairness of order, but he could not see justice in punishment for survival. He approached her cautiously, keeping his hands visible. "You did what you had to do," he said softly. "I do not know the council's reasons, but I know your heart. You chose life, and that is never wrong." Sarah's eyes glimmered with a mixture of fatigue and pain. She listened to his voice, strange though it was, and felt the warmth behind it. For the first time since her exile, she allowed herself a small measure of hope. She lowered her head toward him, a silent acknowledgement that his presence was not a threat. The hatchling stirred and opened one small eye. Its scales shone faintly in the early light, and it yawned as if sensing the quiet understanding forming between them. Tomasz crouched low, offering a hand of peace. He did not reach toward Aaron, only sat and watched. The hatchling's curiosity overcame caution, and it stepped forward, sniffing the human carefully. Sarah watched every movement, ready to shield her child at a moment's notice. Her body ached from the chains, yet she did not strike. She trusted him enough to see that he meant no harm. Why punish life for trying to survive? Tomasz whispered aloud, though not expecting an answer. Why make fear stronger than mercy? Sarah's chest rumbled softly in response, almost like a sigh. She could not speak in words, but her presence communicated her understanding. The council's laws were cold, designed to control dragons and prevent what they feared most, a rise in their kind that could challenge the order of the galaxy. They saw her act of giving birth as rebellion, not as an act of love. Tomasz looked at the chains again, remembering the countless rules that governed every corner of space. Order was important, yes, but it was not life. Not this. Not a mother protecting her child. He clenched his fists, feeling anger and frustration. "This is wrong," he said. "No law should crush what is sacred." Sarah shifted slightly, her gaze fixed on him. There was a connection forming, stronger than words, stronger than fear. She saw in him a being willing to understand beyond the council's judgment. She had waited for someone who could see the truth, and now, perhaps, she had found him. Tomasz crouched lower and reached for the water container he had brought. He poured some into a shallow dish, sliding it toward the hatchling. Aaron approached slowly, drinking carefully. Each sip seemed to bring a small spark of life back into the child. Sarah watched, her chest tightening with relief. "You are not alone anymore," Tomasz said quietly. "I will not leave you here to face this alone." Sarah felt a strange warmth at his words. The galaxy had cast her out, punished her, and left her to struggle in silence. Yet now, with this human soldier, she felt a connection she had not known in decades. Someone who understood, someone who could see her heart instead of the law. She lowered her head to nuzzle Aaron, shielding the hatchling further. Tomasz continued to speak softly, telling her of distant worlds where life thrived, of people who chose kindness even when fear ruled them. His voice carried patience and determination, and it formed a fragile bridge between them. The chains pulsed once more, as if sensing her rising strength. Sarah knew she could not remain bound forever, not with someone who had seen the truth standing beside her. The council's judgment weighed heavily, but Tomasz's presence reminded her that justice and compassion could exist together. Hours passed, and the quiet grew less heavy. Sarah allowed herself to rest while Tomasz remained alert. He did not touch the chains, did not attempt to free her yet, but his unwavering presence was a promise. He would fight for them both if the galaxy demanded it. For the first time, Sarah dared to imagine a future beyond punishment. A future where Aaron could grow without fear. a future where dragons could live without the constant threat of judgment. She did not speak, yet in her eyes, Tomasz read understanding and hope. The weight of judgment remained, but it was no longer unbearable. With Tomasz beside her, Sarah felt strength returning to her wings. The chains were heavy, but she knew she would endure. Not because of the council's laws, but because life itself demanded resilience. And in the quiet light of the moon, the mother and her child, with a human soldier as witness, began to dream of freedom. The barren moon seemed quieter than before. Yet, beyond the horizon, distant stars shimmered like tiny flames, silent witnesses to the growing determination of a mother and her child. Sarah stretched her wings, testing their strength despite the chains. Aaron nestled against her chest, still weak but slowly regaining energy. Tomasz watched both of them closely, planning carefully. The time had come. The chains were designed to weaken her, but they could not take away her will. Sarah could feel her own power returning, a quiet strength that had lain dormant under fear and punishment. Tomasz knew that if they stayed, the council's agents would eventually find them. Their only choice was to leave the moon and take Sarah's story to the stars. Tomasz approached her carefully, lowering his hands in a gesture of peace. "We can leave this place," he said softly. "The council thinks they can control you, but together, we can show them the truth." Sarah tilted her head, considering him. Her body ached from the long days of punishment, but her heart stirred with the courage she had once felt in the skies. She had survived the chains, the cold, and the endless nights alone. With Tomasz, she felt something she had not felt in years: hope that her child would not only survive but thrive. Tomasz began to work on the chains. He had studied their energy patterns and found a weakness in their rhythm. Each pull strained her slightly, but he could disrupt it long enough for her to regain mobility. Sparks flew as he manipulated the device, careful not to harm her. Sarah remained still, trusting him fully for the first time. Aaron chirped softly, sensing the change. The hatchling's tiny claws tapped on the rocks, eager but cautious. Sarah nuzzled the child gently, murmuring reassurance. Her scales glimmered faintly in the moonlight as she flexed her wings, feeling them respond to her slowly returning strength. When the final pulse was disrupted, the chains fell slack. Sarah lifted her wings and spread them wide. The cool air of the moon brushed over her, and for a moment, she felt the freedom she had long been denied. Tomasz stepped back, giving her space, and smiled with quiet relief. "We need to move quickly," he said. "The council may already know we are here. We must reach my ship and leave this moon before anyone arrives." Sarah nodded, her great wings catching the weak gravity of the moon. She shifted Aaron onto her back carefully, holding the hatchling between her wings. With a powerful push against the rocks, she launched into the sky. The first flight since her punishment felt strange but exhilarating. The chains were gone, and her strength returned gradually. The hatchling chirped excitedly, clinging tightly as the wind swept past. Tomasz followed, running toward his ship. He reached it and activated the engines. The human vessel lifted off just as Sarah rose higher, her silver scales gleaming in the starlight. Together, they soared away from the desolate moon, leaving punishment and exile behind. Once in orbit, Tomasz piloted the ship carefully, maintaining a safe distance from Sarah. "We are not safe yet," he said. "The council will send forces to bring you back. But we will show them something they cannot ignore." Sarah's eyes glimmered with understanding. She had been judged, punished, and cast aside, yet the galaxy itself had not ended. There was still a chance to defend life, to defend the bond between mother and child. Her roar echoed through the vacuum of space, not as a cry of pain, but as a declaration of defiance. Aaron chirped in response, tiny wings fluttering as the hatchling tested the currents of low gravity inside the protective layers of Sura's wings. Tomash watched them, feeling the weight of the moment. Together, they were more than dragon and human, they were a symbol of life standing against fear and control. The journey through the stars was tense. Sensors picked up distant patrols from the Council, scanning for signs of a dragon in flight. Tomash maneuvered the ship through asteroid fields, weaving between rocks and debris to avoid detection. Sura followed, her wings cutting through the void with surprising speed. Each beat of her wings carried determination and courage. Tomash spoke to her quietly, guiding her through safe passages. "We will reach allies," he said. "We will tell the galaxy that you are not a threat. You are a mother protecting her child, and nothing is wrong with that." Sura responded with a soft hum, her voice vibrating in harmony with the ship. The sound was strange to Tomash but comforting. It was a promise that she would fight, not with anger, but with purpose. The mother and child would survive, and they would carry their story beyond the Council's fear. As stars streaked past them, the human and the dragon felt a new strength rising. Defiance was not reckless. It was courage. It was the refusal to bow to unjust laws. Tomash understood that this moment was not only for Sura and Aaron but for every life the Council had judged unfairly. The galaxy would see them soon. And when it did, it would have to acknowledge that compassion and life were stronger than fear and control. Sura, Aaron, and Tomash moved together, leaving punishment behind, and entering a future where their bond would challenge the very order of the stars. The galaxy stretched wide before them, filled with countless stars, planets, and endless possibilities. Sura soared alongside Tomash's ship, her wings strong and steady, carrying Aaron safely between them. The air of freedom was new and exhilarating. After weeks of punishment and fear, they had broken free from the chains of the Council. Tomash guided the ship carefully, leading them to a hidden region of space where other civilizations sympathetic to life beyond the Council's strict laws had made their homes. There, dragons, humans, and other creatures lived in understanding, not fear. It was a place of refuge and hope, a place where Sura could finally rest and teach Aaron the ways of her kind. As they approached the region, Sura slowed her flight. She had never flown with such care before, not for anyone but her hatchling. The air around them seemed lighter, less tense. Aaron chirped excitedly, stretching tiny wings as if preparing for the first real flight outside the safety of its mother. Tomash smiled, seeing the hatchling's courage. It was a new beginning. They landed on a quiet, green world. Soft grass and gentle streams greeted them, and the sun's light reflected off the water in gentle waves. For the first time in many cycles, Sura felt calm. She lowered Aaron to the ground and allowed the hatchling to explore. Aaron's eyes widened at the sight of trees and water, and it took small, cautious steps forward. Sura watched with pride, her chest swelling with relief and joy. Tomash stepped out of the ship, keeping a respectful distance. He knew this world was not his, and he did not wish to impose. Yet he had helped them reach safety, and that alone gave him a sense of fulfillment. He watched Sura and Aaron, realizing how extraordinary this moment was. A mother had survived against the galaxy's fear, and a child had been born into freedom. Sura lowered her head toward Tomash. In her eyes was gratitude, not just for freeing them from the chains, but for understanding them when no one else did. Tomash nodded, understanding the unspoken connection. Words were not needed here. Actions and trust had built a bond stronger than any council law. Aaron chirped and hopped forward, dipping into a shallow stream. The water reflected the light of the sun, and for a moment, Tomasz could see joy pure and unguarded in the hatchling. Sura moved closer, nuzzling Aaron softly, teaching it how to drink and remain aware of the surroundings. She was patient, careful, and proud. This was the life she had fought for. Tomasz looked at the horizon. The council would notice their disappearance soon, and perhaps they would send forces to retrieve the dragon. Yet he knew the truth of the galaxy was bigger than any law or order. Courage and compassion could not be chained. Life, when protected and cherished, had its own strength that no punishment could erase. Sura lifted her wings and stretched them fully, casting a shadow over the grass. The power of her kind was present, but it was no longer a threat. It was a promise. A promise that life would continue, that Aaron would grow, and that the dragon would teach her child the values of strength, freedom, and hope. Tomasz approached slowly, respecting the moment. "The galaxy may not be ready for what you are," he said softly. "But someday, they will see." Sura's eyes gleamed. She did not need his words to understand. Together, they had survived. Together, they had defied fear. Together, they had proven that love and courage were stronger than judgment. The galaxy would change because of them, even if only slowly. Aaron chirped again, hopping onto Sura's back and spreading tiny wings in imitation of her. Sura lowered her head and let the hatchling try its first short flight. Tomasz watched in awe as the little dragon lifted into the air, wobbling at first, then gaining balance. The hatchling soared just a few feet before landing, chirping happily. Sura roared softly, a sound not of anger but of triumph. Tomasz smiled, understanding the significance. This was the dawn of a new life, not just for the dragons, but for the galaxy itself. Laws could punish, councils could judge, but life and courage would always find a way. The sun rose higher, casting warm light across the grass, the streams, and the dragon family. Tomasz knew their journey was far from over. Challenges would come, for the galaxy was vast and not all hearts were ready for change. Yet he also knew that hope, once given a chance, could never be destroyed. Sura spread her wings again and lifted Aaron gently into the sky. The hatchling chirped, growing stronger with every beat. Tomasz watched them fly, feeling pride in both human and dragon. Together, they had survived judgment, defied fear, and created a future where life mattered more than laws. As the dragon and her child soared over the green world, Tomasz stood at the stream's edge, feeling the warmth of the sun on his face. A new dawn had come. Not only for Sura and Aaron, but for the idea that courage and compassion could triumph in a galaxy ruled by fear. The chains were gone, the punishment ended, and the galaxy had witnessed the power of hope.